Thank you, everyone. It's such a joy to be with you. I am so grateful to Andrew and to Lumen Fidelitas, which I had to practice saying 15 times to get it out right, for the great honor of being here. We've had many Magnificat days over the years since the founding of Magnificat in 1998, but the best Magnificat day was in Memphis. Now, don't go telling Philadelphia I said that. So I'm going to speak until about 7:45. So what's that? That's 35 minutes. And I always announce in advance how long I'm going to speak. That's because once I heard Cardinal Avery Dulles, God be good to him, started talk by saying, I'm going to speak to you for 1 hour. I announce that to you in advance, in the event that you finish listening before I finish speaking. But I mean, we'll leave the last 15 minutes for questions, comments, and denunciations, okay? So if you're going to throw anything, throw it then. Don't do it before. Now, it's somewhat prophetic, really, that the topic for tonight's discussion, which will be continued tomorrow with a different talk, but they both stand on their own, is the ongoing role of conversion in the life of faith. When Andrew and I settled on this subject, we could not have known the kind of trials and turmoil the church would be facing at this particular moment in time. So it would always be apropos, but it's especially apropos now with what we're going through. Because conversion, sometimes we think, okay, well, I was converted. I was baptized, I was converted as an adult, it's over and done with. But no, not really. In fact, we need to be converted as much and as often as the bread undergoes a conversion to become the body of Christ. That's the word that theology actually uses to speak about that process, that sacred, miraculous event. The Catechism speaks in a few places about conversion, and I thought it might be a good idea just to highlight some of them. So, for example, in 1428, we read, Christ's call to conversion continues to resound in the lives of Christians. The second conversion is an uninterrupted task for the whole church, which is holy but always in need of purification. In 1888, it says, it is necessary then to appeal to the spiritual and moral capacities of the human person and to the permanent need for his inner conversion. And 2630, which is the section on prayer, it says very simply, we must be converted anew every day. You don't have to be theological, actually, to figure this out. Just think about food. So, if you like to eat, and I like to eat, when I became a Dominican, I thought, you can't become a Dominican unless you're fat. You know, so, not the sisters, just the priests. I'm so happy the sisters are here. Aren't they awesome, the National Dominican sisters? I can't wait till they start teaching at St. Louis. Wink, wink. So, but just think about food. So let's say you have some delicious, barbecue or something. So there's going to be a conversion. It's either going to be a conversion to energy so that you can do all the Olympic things you need to do, or it's going to be converted to fat. And the same is true in the life of faith. If this kind of conversion doesn't happen on a regular basis, if it's not simply part of the daily rigor of our lives, the regime of our lives, then we start to get in trouble. And in fact, isn't this part of the wisdom behind the innovation given to us as a great gift from our past Holy Father, the great Pope St. John Paul II, in blessing the church with the luminous mysteries? Because what's the third luminous mystery? Proclaim the kingdom and the call to conversion. That mystery is the proclamation of the kingdom and the call to conversion. So it's something that we all of us need. I would like to speak about it from the point of view of three perspectives: conversion and desire, conversion and darkness, and conversion and design. And if I run out of time, I'll just speak about it from the point of view of two things. But the good thing about each of these is that they relate to faith, hope, and love. And as promised, I would like to use a painting of two paintings of Caravaggio to help be a visual guide to what I hope to say. Now, I'm not an art historian. One of my dearest friends in the world, who's now deceased, God be good to him, Father Michael Morris, who used to read a Magnificat, was a great art historian, so he taught me a few things. So what I'm telling you here might be full of lacunae, which I'll let you fill in, but I think the stuff I'm going to say is factually a-okay. And as I say, it always helps to look at something, because art not only illuminates, but it also brings about transport. We are wounded by beauty, says Pope Benedict XVI. So conversion, and here we see depicted Caravaggio's second attempt at the subject. This is conversion on the road to Damascus. Conversion very often gets shunted into sort of a moralistic box. So I don't want to hear about conversion, because conversion is about, oh, you're doing things wrong, you got to change the way you do things, and you have to be a better person. And I don't know about you, but that's very hard for me to get. I know I have to be a better person, but isn't there a better way of getting me to be a better person than just a finger-wagging sort of threat? None of us like that. And it's actually Blessed Cardinal John Henry Newman, who I think is going to be canonized pretty soon. I mean, I hear the cause is moving, who has this amazing thing to say about conversion. He says, you know what conversion is? Conversion is nothing more than a deeper discovery of what we already desire. This is conversion. Conversion is paying attention to our desires. Now, this is difficult because for many centuries, desire has gotten a short shrift in the Catholic Church because of bad theologies, bad spiritualities, which want to downplay the role of desire or to turn it into something naughty or evil or almost something that has to be expunged, something that has to be removed. But for this, I follow the great doctor of the church, Thérèse of Lisieux, who's one of my heroes, who was having a big fight with her sub-prioress. This is a dangerous thing to do when you're a Carmelite nun and so young as she was, because this nun, like almost all the nuns in Carmel at that time, were proponents of Jansenism. And Jansenism is a really bad spirituality, which basically says, here I'm not doing it justice, but that you can't trust your desires. Desires get you in trouble, so you have to try to get rid of your desires. And you have to just yearn for the great things. You yearn for what's transcendental. Anything that is imminent, anything that's close at hand, no. We're going to do everything we can to just get our thoughts and all of our actions focused on heaven. And this nun, Sister Febroni, was completely caught up in the virtue of justice, because this was the great hallmark of being a really good Jansenist. God, you see, I do X, Y, and Z for you, so you have to do A, B, and C for me. It's like a business agreement. This is not Christianity. And so after going back and forth a few times, Sister Thérèse, getting somewhat frustrated, turned to Sister Febroni and said, Sister, if what you want from the Lord is justice, what you'll get from the Lord is justice, because God gives us himself according to our desires. And she refused to settle for just justice. She wanted to be loved and to love the way the great saints, like her patron, St. Teresa of Avila loved. And you do too, don't you? That's why you're here on a beautiful summer night, listening to a weirdo Dominican, because you have these desires. We have to pay attention to these desires more than anything else, because conversion is simply a deeper discovery of what we already desire. Now, when I was doing the research for this, I discovered that this was not Caravaggio's first attempt at this subject, which was commissioned. This is the first attempt. And if you notice, it's different in many ways, aesthetically, the kinds of things that are included, etc. But when he turned it into the patron, who rejected it, because I think the patron was probably a man of some sort of theological bearing, he realized, no, this doesn't get close enough. It's not true enough to what really happened to St. Paul on the road. But because look at the main features that distinguish this version of it. So in this one we have the Lord coming down from heaven, and because he has a body, he can't fly around. So he needs an angel to be his Uber. So in he comes, so the angel is supporting the human flesh of Christ, so that he can make his appearance to Saul on the road to Damascus. And here is Saul, struck in every possible way, but covering his eyes, because it's just too much to bear. He can't bear looking at it. And sometimes in the life of faith, this is who we are. We're like this before the mystery. The mystery does everything in its power to get on our path, to get in our face, to be close to us, to come to us at the moment when we are most prone to be lost, unless the Lord intervenes and breaks through everything that is keeping us from living a holy life. And what is our response? Our response is, and this is what we can call, from the point of view of moral theology, impenetrability. I follow the ecclesial movement, Communion and Liberation, and that's where I learned this, from the president of the movement, Father Julian Caron, but he learned it from the founder, servant of God, Monsignor Luigi Giussani. And you know what this is from your own experience. So God does something wonderful to try to break through, to get past the barriers that we set up. And what do? We fend him off. We don't let ourselves be struck. We say, I won't accept what is in front of me, even if it's the most beautiful thing. You know who does this sometimes is children. When they've been punished, and they have to go to their room for 5 minutes, and then the father says, okay, you can come out now. And the little boy says, no, I'm not coming out yet. It's impenetrability. You see, it's built into our fallen nature, sort of. That we want the most beautiful thing, but there's a petulance about the human spirit that makes us resist, and it's a bad resistance. The I, the self, gets all closed up, and I refuse to let myself be touched. And in fact, this impenetrability, if it goes on, becomes the demonic origin of despair. And so as I'm living my ongoing conversion, I have to check myself, like you check yourself for ticks. We have to check our spiritual life for impenetrability. Am I resisting God, who is going out of his way to come close to me through the flesh of his Son? Now, why is it that this version got rejected? Because, as I say, it's a very common human phenomenon. And I think the reason is because that really wasn't Saul's problem, was it? That wasn't his problem. So if we go back, Steve Denegri taught me how to do this. Notice what happens here. So do you remember how Jesus was in the other picture? He was like this. Caravaggio decides, that's really cool. I need that in my picture. But I realize I put it on the wrong person. So he puts it on Paul, on Saul. Because he didn't say no when Jesus Christ came. He didn't resist. He was overwhelmed. The inbreaking of a grace. So Caravaggio not only changes the aesthetic approach to this particular subject, but he changes the very theology, because this is how Christ heals us from our impenetrability, by calling us back to our own heart. What did Saul do for a living? He was a tent maker, and what else was his claim to fame? He was a Pharisee. We have the smart people sitting in the front row on this side, so you have to catch up. You're going to have a chance. And how did the Pharisees used to pray? What would you say? What's the typical way that the Pharisees would pray? Don't say the rosary. What is it? I just can't hear you. Say it again.
They would say, I thank God that I'm not like the others.
They did do that. But I mean, officially, what was the way the Pharisees prayed? Say it again. In public, but what did they have, a breviary, or what did they do? The Psalms. Okay, you're caught up. The Psalms. And Saul, was very proud of being a Pharisee. He says the reason why he pursued the Christians with so much voraciousness is for religious motives. Now, he went beyond that, because it says Saul breathing murderous threats. There used to be a commandment against murder. Do they still have that one? Yeah, that can't be virtuous, breathing murderous threats. But Saul would pray the Psalms. And he would pray them fervently, and he would take them seriously, because he believed that the Psalms were the divine word of God, and that they were revealed, and that what they said and what they promised was real. So, for example, Saul would often pray these lines from the Psalms, which I've put together. God bless you. O God, you are my God. For you I long. For you my body yearns. For you my soul thirsts. For your love is better than life. I am weary with crying out. My throat is parched. My eyes have failed looking for my God. O Lord of hosts, let your face shine upon us, that we may be saved. Do not stay far from me. Come, says my heart, seek God's face. Your face, Lord, do I seek. Do not hide your face from me. I waited for the Lord, who bent down and heard my cry. Flash your lightning and reach out your hand. Lord, incline your heavens and come. Reach out your hand from on high. And what do we know about the conversion of Saul on the road to Damascus? He tells his conversion story several times in the Acts of the Apostles, but beginning with chapter 9, where he doesn't tell it, but it gets told of him. We're told what? We read 9:3 and 8. A light from the sky suddenly flashed around him. Flash your lightning. Jesus answers this literally. The prayer comes true at the conversion of Paul literally. And then led Saul by the hand and brought him to Damascus. Reach out your hand from on high and lead me. Christ has such a tenderness, a tender regard, a solicitude for the desiring heart of Saul, for the yearning, aching heart of Saul, that he fulfills his prayer down to the least detail. What are the first words that Jesus speaks in the Gospel of John? Oh, see, you didn't know you're going to have these little quizzes. You can do it, you can do it. Any Protestants here? The first words in the Gospel. Well, in the beginning of the Word is John's first words, but Jesus' first. Go ahead, tell us. What are you looking for? What are you looking for? This is Jesus begging for your heart. He is always saying this to you. What are you looking for? What have you let your heart settle on? You know, St. Thomas in the Summa Theologica and Bishop Robert Barron speaks about this in the Catholicism series. He says, you know, when we pay attention to this heart of ours, the way that Saul does when he begs in these beautiful psalms, we realize to be a human being is to be saddled with this chasm. It is to be an abyss. And if I don't know how to fill the abyss, life becomes abysmal. And so what do? St. Thomas says there are only 4 things that people resort to in the attempt to fill that huge gaping hole which is the human being without God. And you know what they are. They are, I use P words so I can remember them. They are pleasure, possessions, power, and popularity. But no matter how much we give ourselves to these things, which in and of themselves, they're not bad. I mean, come on, lasagna? Who could say that's bad? But too much of it, yes, of course. But the more we give ourselves to these finite things, what do they show us? No. I need something more with a capital S and a capital M, because my heart is not made for anything finite. I need something beyond the finite. I need what is infinite. I need what is unlimited, what is unbounded. And this is why Jesus Christ, in constantly goading us, as he says to St. Paul in 26:14 of Acts, Saul, it is hard for you to kick against the goad. The goad is pay attention to your heart. If it's settled on pleasures, if it's settled on possessions, if it's settled on power, if it's settled on popularity, just ask yourself, is it enough? Is it enough? Or do you want something more? And the honest heart is always going to beg, my heart is thirsting for you. It's not for anything that this world can give. And the most reasonable thing that I can do is to pursue that. And what does the Roman Catholic Church call that pursuit? A little louder. Prayer. Prayer. The most human thing creatures like us can do is to beg, come and be the life that I cannot be without you. Come and be my life. So Jesus speaks these words because they are the words that constantly break through the impenetrability and send us back to ourselves and make it possible for us to long with a longing that brings about the same possibility, which is the newness that Saul is going to experience after he gets up from this road. I love this quotation from St. Gregory Nazianzen. If I were not yours, my Christ, I would feel like a finished creature. Anybody here feel like a finished creature? Thank God, right? Thank God we don't. Because that's how we know that we're Christ's. And it's that longing that makes that friendship happen. So conversion and desire. What about darkness? So if you look at this painting, if you notice, it contains no architecture and no landscape. This is because Caravaggio was a lousy painter and he couldn't do buildings. No, that's not why. And also, if you notice, everything's really dark. So if we look at the other one, I don't want too far. Here you see some leaves. And you see there's light in the background, and look at all the faces that are lit up. All the faces are lit up, except for the Lord's, really. So there's a lot of light in this picture, right? So now we go back. No light, no horizon, no buildings, and a lot of darkness. He did this because he had a lot of black paint. No, he did this on purpose because it's a style. It's called tenebroso. Now remember that if you have a cocktail party coming up. I love the tenebroso in your living room. Gee, I was going for chiaroscuro, but this is a dark style, and it serves a purpose, and it's a theological purpose, which is this. The darkness keeps us from paying attention to things that we shouldn't pay attention to. The lights are not on those things, so that we won't look at them. And the beautiful thing that we're taught by this painting is how much we need the darkness. When the darkness comes, it feels like the worst thing. When the darkness comes, we sense that we are being excluded, that it's over for us, that we've done something wrong, that this is our punishment, this is the beginning of the way out. Because, for example, if you think about the parable of the talents, the third servant who refuses to invest the money and brings it back without even getting any interest, he's cast out where? Into the darkness, where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth, the kind of place enjoyed only by mushrooms and out-of-work dentists. But darkness gives us a sense that no, see, this is punishment. But is it always that way? Obviously not, because the world begins in darkness, and everything comes from it. And sometimes in our ongoing conversion, we're brought back to that moment before creation, so that we can be brought back to that moment of new creation. This also is from Father Julian Coron. He says, when I am in endless darkness, do you ever feel that way? If we had more time, I'd ask you to stand up and share your story. When I am in endless darkness, so much so that I cannot stand myself anymore, it is there that I am forced to go to the bottom of it and recognize an other. As terrible as the darkness is, when we get to that place, if we're paying attention, we know that it's not over because there's someone there in the darkness with us. Jessica Powers has a beautiful Advent poem about this, about being completely caught up in the darkness of life. But then she compares this to the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she says, there is someone in this darkness with me. All darkness is incarnational. All darkness bears us into the light, bound with the one who comes to be our light. St. Vincent Ferrer says, the good thief was converted how? By Christ's shadow. That as the sun was declining, the shadow of the cross touched him. You remember that part in the Acts of the Apostles where people are clamoring to bring their people close to St. Peter as he's walking by, so they carry the sick out on stretchers and they lay them on the sidewalks with the hope of what? Do you remember? That his shadow would fall on them. They were longing for Peter's darkness, and how that must have made him weep when he saw that, because his darkness was much darker than just the shadow that he threw. And he knew it, and he knew what he had been saved from, And he knew that he could not be the great instrument of faith that he was unless he was willing to suffer through that darkness and let Christ transform it. The astonishing thing is, Paul was not blind before he met Christ. He had his own ideas, obviously, but he was yearning for something, as we said. But the first fruit of discipleship with Jesus Christ is what? He's made blind for 3 days. Now, if you were in that position, how did he keep going? You know, this is what Christianity is about. I say yes, and I lose my sight. But it's a darkness that he needed in order to be able to see for the rest of his life. I always pay attention in the letters of Paul whenever he mentions light or seeing or vision or things like that. He's not like St. John, who uses the leitmotif of darkness and light. You know, so for example, Judas leaves the table of the Last Supper, and then John adds the editorial comment, which is, and it was night. Awesome. And it was night. Now, he's telling us that. Why? Because we need to know, we don't have our clocks? No. Because he's saying there's a darkness that now has suffused the world because of what Judas has done. But for example, in Colossians 1:13, St. Paul confesses, the Father rescued us from the power of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of his Son. He's speaking from his own heart. In 1 Corinthians 4:4-5, he says, the Lord will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will manifest the motives of our hearts, what they really desire. Because Paul lived a life of ongoing conversion. Because conversion is not just about our sins and our evil. It certainly involves that. But it involves all the fragmented experiences of our life, all the painful memories, all the frustrating things, all the unachieved hopes, all the heartache, all the failures. Conversion itself is a way of seeing. Where is Jesus in this painting now? Caravaggio couldn't fit him in, so no. Theologically, he decided he's, as the all-knowing front row has said again, our Lord is in the light. It's the light. Pope John Paul II says, conversion means returning to God by evaluating earthly realities in the unfailing light of his truth. Sometimes we need the darkness to gain a new perspective on how to look at reality. Doesn't it turn you into a realist if you haven't been up to now? If you can't pay the bills, or here's a terrible sickness, or there's a problem I just can't surmount, or I'm completely undone by my powerlessness before these circumstances, we become realists. And these convert us away from our creatureliness and towards God. Because again, this is the only tension in life. If we're not being every day more and more converted ad Deum toward God, we are becoming more and more converted ad creaturam, toward the creature, toward ourself, toward self-love. Pope Benedict XVI says, we need conversion. We need to turn around inside, as it were, to overcome the illusion of what is visible and to develop the feeling, the ears and the eyes for what is invisible. I need to be converted every day because I need to be able to perceive the invisible among us. If I'm not converted every day, when I sit before the Blessed Sacrament, I start to give up because I don't see anything there except the appearance of a piece of bread. But the more I live, the hope that this kind of conversion gives me, the more I see past the visible to what is really there before me. Great Dominican theologian of the 20th century, Antonin Sertiange, says, conversion does not consist strictly in renouncing evil, but in turning toward the good. Renunciation would be nothing. It might even be absurd without the triumphant attraction of a higher object. And that's what the darkness of Saul in his blindness blesses him with, this desire finally to meet this man, to meet Jesus Christ, and to live, turn toward him for the rest of his life, which he does. This is why the painting strips out everything that's not essential. And this is in the chapel of Santa Maria del Popolo, and it's on a side chapel, so you have to look at it sort of obliquely from the side. And he knew that because it was being designed for that chapel. But it's great because sometimes that's the kind of posture we have to take really to see truly what we're meant to see. And there's a reason why this very center of the painting here is the horse. You know, it's an awful lot of equine stuff in there. But the thing is, when we have these eyes to see what's invisible, when we can evaluate earthly realities in the light of the truth, we can see things about ourselves that otherwise we wouldn't want to see. For example, in the Transfiguration, after the event happens, Moses and Elijah go away, and the light dims, and then Jesus is with the apostles. And do you remember what it says at the end of one of the Gospels, the disciple, what it says about the disciples and Jesus? It says, they looked up and saw only Jesus. As if to say, the Transfiguration is a kind of mirror. So too in this painting, St. Paul, Saul of Tarsus, looks up and sees only a horse's rear end. And he realizes, yep, that's who I've been. That's a good mirror of me. It's a really good mirror of me. I bet he had a picture of that in his house. Conversion is realism. It's the willingness to see the truth of things and to conform our conduct to it, no matter how much it hurts. And sometimes, as I say, we need the darkness for that to happen. And then finally, quickly, conversion and design. As I say, conversion isn't just about getting my behavior modified or changing my conduct. That's part of it. But it's a much grander, much nobler endeavor. Conversion is the way that I surrender myself to the good God intends for me. It's the way that I surrender myself to providence, to the design of God. Converted people aren't necessarily perfect. They still have their character flaws and things like that. But in the way that they live their life, all of it is given over to Him. He's there. He's always there. There's no way that I can't do the least little thing without reference to Him, because I'm converted to the design of God. You know, and if you notice, Saul's body kind of serves like a triangle. And the Renaissance didn't like this, because in typical Renaissance paintings, you would have like a pyramid. So you'd have like Jesus and John the Baptist standing in front of the Blessed Mother, and the Blessed Mother would be sitting there, and it would form a very nice pyramid, symmetrical, etc. Well, Caravaggio, who was kind of a bad boy, but a really good theologian, took that and inverted it. Why? Because that kind of inversion leads to real conversion. He turns it literally on its head. Because the only real design of God is one that doesn't start with my own understanding and my own thoughts. It's always going to be a surprise. This is why we can hear St. Paul say with so much conviction in his letters, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and constraints for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is a ludicrous thing to say, unless you have met Jesus Christ and you know this is the only possibility for happiness. In Hard as Nails, our charism very deliberately states that we dedicate ourselves to being rejected and to being humiliated in the act of evangelizing, because only rejection and humiliation lead to lasting happiness. Only those things. It's not possible without those things. And it is as if St. Paul is physically portraying that here. And that's why even the way the horse is acting with its hoof up, etc., I mean, he's about to be stepped on at any second. But he doesn't mind. Because as he says, it is no longer I who live, it is Christ who lives in me. Because the converted person is a person who has become forgetful of self in those kinds of ways. And notice there's no distance here. Everything's foreshortened. The figures fill the frames. You can almost smell the horse. He's so close. And look at the way that St. Paul is, sort of spilling out of the picture. Almost expecting what? For you to catch him. And to help him live this life, because he can't live it by himself. What is he going to say in Galatians 6:2? That we have to bear one another's burdens, beginning with him. Bear the burden of me. And then if you ever read the apostles of the letters of St. Paul, try to keep count of all the different companions he had. Dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of them. Why? Because they were bearing the burden who is St. Paul. Benedict XVI says, conversion to Christ ultimately means this: to exit the illusion of self-sufficiency in order to discover and accept one's own need. The need of others and God, the need of his forgiveness and his friendship. That's the design of love that is given to us in our ongoing conversion. That we are aware that to try to live in a self-reliant way is a total waste of time. That everything that I'm looking for happens through the companionship I share, because Christ always reveals himself through his companionship. And for me, it's so telling and so astonishing that St. Paul never lost his fervor for Christ. I mean, if you think about it, even to this day, have you ever been to a Catholic wedding where 1 Corinthians 13 wasn't read at the Mass? I think it would constitute like a new condition for annulling a marriage or something. Oh, you didn't read that. But if you think about it, before this event, Saul of Tarsus, if you had to characterize his life, you would say, this is a man whose entire life was intent on systematically exterminating an entire category of human beings. Does that remind you of anybody? And this is the man who has become the hands-down, unsurpassed, Olympic leader and expert of what love is. How could that possibly happen? It's because he met that love face to face on the road. And in fact, St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa, when he's about to talk about this part of Paul's life, this great hymn, he says, look at the last line of verse 12, where St. Paul says, I'm about to show you a better way. He doesn't say a better philosophy or theology or project or idea or concept or notion or anything else. He doesn't use any kind of philosophical word. And he was a smart guy. He was a Pharisee. He was a theologian. He says, I'm going to show you a better way. What's the way he's talking about? Well, everybody says that Jesus, but that's John's terminology. And Paul doesn't speak with the kind of poetic way that John does. What's the way? I'm going to show you a better way. What's the way? No, because he would have said love. If he was going to use some sort of metaphor, he would use the metaphor. It's not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. Let me show you a better way. What's the way? Come up. No, it's a metaphor. You're very metaphorical on that side of the room. It is.
Rejected and humiliated.
Well, that's metaphorical too. It is the literal road to Damascus. Let me show you where it happened to me. Because I think that after he got his sight back, and Ananias was there, Ananias took him by the hand and led him into the church basement and introduced him to the ladies' sodality, to the CYO basketball team, to the Knights of Columbus. As a Catholic, he was handed his first donut and cup of coffee, given his own bingo card. The thing that absolutely astonished Paul, as he stood there surrounded by these Catholics, was not a single face showed anger, revenge, vengeance, treachery, snidiness. Nothing but love, joy, acceptance, forgiveness. Yes, he was handed parish envelopes, but nothing. And that's why he said to Ananias, go into the kitchen and get a Tupperware container. And because we're going back out into that road, and I'm going to scoop up some of the dirt of the way to Damascus, because I want this conversion to happen, that happened to me, to be an ongoing conversion. And I think that every morning when St. Paul got up, he took some of that dirt and sprinkled it on the floor, and he fell on the road to Damascus all over again, so that he could live this conversion of desire and darkness and design in the glorious way that he really has. So let's beg for that too. God bless you.